Thank you, Speaker. To the Premier. Since 2003, the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee coroner has reported on deaths due to domestic violence in the province, and each year makes recommendations to various levels of government. In their report released this morning, ARC points out that while some progress has been made on those recommendations, much more needs to be done. Shamefully, not all ministries and agencies contacted for this report bothered to respond to each of the recommendations. And worse, not all agencies and ministries have bothered to implement the recommendations made in the coroner's domestic violence reviews. Speaker, 251 women have died as a result of domestic violence in the 10 years since the DVDRC started examining this issue. Just last week, members in this House wore purple scarves in recognition of violence against women, so I know that it's a priority for the legislators in this legislature.
Question.
Premier, what will this government do to establish monitoring mechanisms and implement these recommendations?
Thank you, Premier. Minister responsible for Children and Youth Services.
Thank you, Speaker. And I want to thank the member for this very important question. And we all, I think, want to thank the Domestic Violence Death Review Committee for the report, and we'll all be reviewing the recommendations very carefully. I think at the end of the day, Speaker, we all have the exact same goal, which is an Ontario free of domestic violence. And, of course, my heart goes out to the family that was highlighted in the media, I think just today. A terrible domestic tragedy that affected an entire family. And as a minister responsible for women's issues, it is a priority for me and all of us that Ontario's women and everyone feel safe in their homes, their workplace, and their communities. While Ontario has some of the lowest rates of domestic violence across Canada, we absolutely know there's more work to be done, Speaker, and that's why our government has increased funding for community services that help victims of domestic violence. That has been increased by 48%, Speaker, since 2003.
Answer.
More work to do. Thank you.
Supplementary.
Speaker, unfortunately just today there was a report of a mother and her 2 children who were murdered in Toronto on the weekend, having struggled to find housing in order to flee a violent situation. Access to emergency housing is one of the recommendations that is in the coroner's report. Access to emergency housing remains a problem in the province of Ontario. One of the recommendations is that shelters and second-stage housing continue to receive support and funding that keeps pace with inflation. Speaker, what this group wants is to return to the legislature next year to give this government an A for implementing the recommendations in the coroner's domestic violence review. Why won't this government do everything in its power to ensure that all ministries and agencies comply with the coroner's recommendations to end violence against women and to implement these very important recommendations?
Minister.
Speaker, I think we'll all agree that one domestic violence act is one too many. One death associated with domestic violence is too many. And that's why we have to keep making the investments we've been making. Last week, my colleague, the Minister of Community and Social Services, announced an additional $14.5 million over the next 3 years to support women's shelters, counselling agencies, and transitional housing. And our government started making these investments at a time when the former government, in fact, was cutting funding to women's shelters and support. I am pleased that next week I'll be making an important funding announcement with the Neighbour, Friends and Family Immigration Refugee campaign that will help women and their families affected by domestic violence access to supports that are culturally and linguistically relevant and accessible. We remain very committed, Speaker, to an Ontario free of domestic violence and sexual assault and sexual violence because we firmly believe that every woman has the right to feel safe and secure.
Thank you.
Thank you.